liberty in America is under assault. We no longer live in a reality that includes property rights. We're no longer the kings of our own castle. We no longer enjoy the true benefits of capitalism. Instead, we're negotiating our rights with our own government. This isn't how our country was founded. These aren't the ideas of our founders. It's time to seize back our country. This is the Liberty Hour, where these important issues will be discussed for the sake of America's future. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Constitution in the other, here's your host, Sean Thompson.
This is the Liberty Hour podcast each and every Tuesday and Wednesday. Kid, how many times we got to tell people, you realize the guy who works here thought we were on Thursday. What is going on? We can't be on Thursday because I have to work and earn a living like the majority of normal people out there. I didn't hit the loin lottery like Pritzker or some of the other, my favorite socialists who want to share in a utopian vision. But there's other things we have to discuss a little bit. Because over the last week and a half, I have been showing my absolute and total rejection of communism, pretending to be democratic socialism that has become the Democrat Party. I think it is absolutely and unequivocally a disgrace that in this country we are preaching this kind of philosophy, a country born of liberty and freedom of the citizens. It's really built. And if I when I was a kid, I started to teacher was talking about the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. I said, what the hell is that? I was like 14 years old. So let's read this stuff. And you read it and you realize our history, our actual history, are pretty much people who so embraced individuality that they were arguing almost to the point of killing each other. Again, these are the guys who fought the king about the amount of tyranny that was allowed and what the purpose of law and government is. And you realize that both of them, both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, were arguing about how to protect forever the liberty of the citizen. So here you got two groups of people that would have been considered opposing parties. And one was saying that a central government, a federal government, would protect the property and the rights of the individuals better than something that was separated to just the states. And they compromised and they created the system we have now. But you look at what was then considered a contentious debate, and it was a debate about freedoms. And you oppose that today. What is the debate? A debate about tyrannies. This is what we're really debating. So in my rejection of the statism, of the communism that is promoted by the today modern day Democrats, whether it be the transgendering Ocasio-Cortez we call Beto O'Rourke, whether it be the new kid on the block, Andrew Yang, which I have to tell you, I'm torn. Because I do like the idea of a socialist communist pretending to be a Democrat like Kamala Harris, who is able to sit on her lap on all the way up to the top. The whole thing with the Willie Brown, I cannot believe that has no steam in the news media. The fact that this woman dated Willie Brown, who is the equivalent of a male Ann Esther, slept with this son of a gun till he gave her an appointment, and she is a serious candidate. Women's rights. I mean, you can't write this stuff. And, if you're going to have a communist as the Democrat nominee, at least make it somebody we could have fun with. So I either want a President Kamala Harris, just because she knows the value of how to shake your tail, or I'll take an Andrew Yang just because I want to say President Yang. I love the sound of it. But so I openly reject that. Now, what happens when you reject that communism is that some of the people who embrace the Fabian socialism, you hear that, kid? He loves when I say it. When they embrace the Keynesian economics of a protectionist and they start to preach nationalism to me, I'm equally disgusted because that's only better because it's a slower speed to ultimate government seizure of your life. That's what we're really arguing about. So I reflect on what we used to fight about was how to protect the individual freedom. When you think about the people that really formed this country to protect the property and the rights of the individual, such as our founders. the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, who were nearly going to take each other into the parking lot back then because they were arguing about freedom of you, versus today's political body, which argues about tyranny over you. And I sometimes in my rebuttal of the out-and-out communism we call the Democrat Party, I somehow stoke the intent that I'm supporting the national populism, the Keynesian economic soiree of Donald Trump. Make no mistake of it. I see Donald Trump for exactly what he is, too.
Well, we have to do something. I tell you, I have many millions of followers on Twitter, and it's different than it used to be. Things are happening. Names are taken off. People aren't getting through. You've heard the same complaints. And it seems to be if they're conservative, if they're Republicans, if they're in a certain group, there's discrimination and big discrimination. I see it absolutely on Twitter and Facebook, which I have also, and others I see, but I really focus more on the one platform. And I have many different platforms. I guess we have 60 million, almost 60 million on Twitter. And if you add them all up, it's way over 100 million people. And I get to see firsthand what's going on, and it's not good. And
he has the overture of a tyrant. I'm sorry. Call it for what it is. You understand what he's trying to do here? He doesn't have the principled belief of a monarch or of a past founder or somebody steeped in liberty and freedom, because here's the thing. Donald Trump is a 70s Democrat. That's who he is. And I'm old enough to remember the debates, the Milton Friedman free to choose, the debates between Hayek and the debates between, who was the guy that tried to get rid of the Corvair? I always forget this son of a bitch's name. You know what I'm talking about, kid? He tried to get rid of the Corvair. What do you know? You're 14 years old. You don't know. Anyway, that heavy-handed pretending to be a Democrat, when the fact is that's when it first started, where the government was going, or where people were going to position themselves as a conscientious tyrant. Ralph Nader, that's his name. I knew I'd think of it. Whereas the argument used to be the Ralph Nader consumer protection bureaucracies versus the freedom of actual economy driven by and for and of the people. This has always been the debate. This is why I early on rejected Trump for the Keynesian that he is. See, he likes protectionism. It's now changed words. I listen to all of these idiots who are teenagers who really have no grasp of economic principles or fundamentals at all, and they misuse words like globalism. When the reality is, what they're arguing for is globalism, and they're too stupid to understand it. 312-642-5600, if you're one of these people and you want to correct me, I welcome the debate. Because the reality is, you're arguing talking points that you were learned from this guy, or that you learned from one of his cohorts, frauds that they are. Wilbur Ross, corporatist scumbag that he is. Or the other Liza Minnelli-looking freak that works for him. And I'm not talking about Peter Navarro. I'm talking about Steve Mnuchin. Talk about a guy that likes hookers. You're going to talk about Kraft and not Steve Mnuchin's third wife? What a punchline that is. She's just a better negotiator than those Oriental girls. This is what we're really discussing. Principles and fundamentals of freedom versus tyranny, and the fact that the new Republican Party likes tyranny. They just think they can buy it off. And for the most part, they're right, because nothing's more pliable than a Republican. An Illinois Republican is where you start. The problem is we have acquired an appetite for tyranny because we want to believe it has a safety to it. So we embrace protectionism, and now it's called nationalism. And the problem is people don't realize the definitions of these words. But you know who used to? Who used to recognize the definitions of these words? My boy, who every once in a while they'll compare Ronald Reagan to. I'll hear it from time to time. We've never had a conservative like this since Ronald Reagan. The problem is Ronald Reagan was the conservative, but he was hampered by the Republican Party to take that other buffoon, liar, fraud, Prescott Bush's favorite son, Bush. And all of the bad policies that happened during that time, those were Bush. But never forget we had a man who believed in fundamentals and true freedom, and that was Ronald Reagan.
Our peaceful trading partners are not our enemies. They are our allies. We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world. all while cynically waving the American flag.
Sound like
the
Trump?
Expansion of the international economy is not a foreign invasion. It is an American triumph, one we worked hard to achieve, and something central to our vision of a peaceful and prosperous world of freedom. After the Second World War, America led the way to dismantle trade barriers and create a world trading system that set the stage for decades of unparalleled economic growth. Yes, back in 1776, our founding fathers believed that free trade was worth fighting for, and we can celebrate their victory, because today, trade is at the core of the alliance that secure the peace and guarantee our freedom. It is the source of our prosperity and the path to an even brighter future for America. Until next week, thanks for listening, and God bless you.
See, that's what principles are. That's what an economic foundation sounds like. It doesn't sound like Donald Trump. It doesn't sound like protectionism. It doesn't sound like favoritism. See, because the reality is it doesn't work. Trumponomics is a lesser scam than Obamanomics, but a scam none the same. It is a manipulation of the macro climate in hopes to benefit the micro consumer. And that's why you have to buy the phony Trump economy. And it's phony. It's why he embraced the numbers he once made fun of when Obama was in the seat. And the problem is, we as Republicans, I've got guys on Twitter, they're arguing with me. These kids who don't know if it's Tuesday or July, you're telling me that national protectionism is something that America promoted and was successful under. It just shows me your level of stupidity, because we've had protectionist presidents in the past like Hoover, and those normally lead to a massive depression or a massive recession. That's where the policies of Trumponomics go, and Reaganomics should not be compared with it, because Reagan unleashed the yuppie. Reagan took office and said, go get him. Now the field is level. Trump says, I'm in charge. Now I'll pick my winners and losers, whether it be steel or energy or whatever the flavor of the month is. Because the reality is, now as Republicans, we have become protectionist Democrats. That's what we're now calling the new conservatism. That's what we're now calling a successful high GDP, without focusing in the fact that Donald Trump's economy is a scam, shell game right out of New York, 3-card Monte. Let me organize, let me control, let me pick winners and losers, and let's pretend it's successful. In the meantime, it's the Trump economy in which you're seeing the vacated real estate, the small business being crushed, big business expanding, big spending through the roof. At the same time, you're having record revenues. And he is embracing the result of Trump taxes, and we now call them tariffs. And he goes on time and time again and tells you how billions and billions and billions are pouring into the Treasury. I want a system like Reagan talked about, of absolute and total equality of opportunity and equality of access. What he did is tore down the barriers to allow small business to thrive. There will never be a Trump yuppie. Nothing will happen, because he's as he rests assured of spending. Here, Congression. Trump sends record high black budget to Congress to be approved. So at the same time we pretend there's this argument going on, he wants to spend another $23 trillion for the CIA. So this is the problem. We've now embraced the old 60s, 70s Democrat, where it's spend, 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 hide the taxes. He's not taxing you outright. In fact, this other new tax scheme that they came up with, that now the people are realizing, it not only sunsets any benefits you think you have, but it's not really there anyway, because you're double and triple taxed when you live in states like Illinois. And then I have to have the ex-free marketeer, Stephen Moore, come on and say, that's too bad, move. Okay, Steve, I'll take your advice. And then I'll hear Stephen Moore in the same interview tell me how Trump and Reagan are similar conservatives. You know who doesn't think so? Is Trump. Trump thinks Reagan was wrong.
Since Bush the first, and that includes a lot of territory. Frankly, Ronald Reagan. You remember, I thought he was great. I loved his style, his attitude. He was a great cheerleader for our for the country.
Was a cheerleader?
But not great on the trail.
You're a cheerleader.
For many, many years, they've been outsmarted. We used to be a nation of tariffs. When other countries would come to the United States, they had to pay for the privilege of taking our product.
He doesn't understand what a tariff is.
Jobs. They had to pay. They wanted to come in and sell their product. They had to pay.
This is a fundamental economic problem, is that he doesn't understand. A tariff, the country doesn't pay. For all of you out there with your Caddyshack hats on, waving the Trump flag, the country doesn't pay a nickel, dummy. Your fellow American pays a premium for his freedom of choice. So not one foreign country pays a tariff. If we can learn anything through this despicable 4 years of lies and deceit, let us learn that. Your neighbor pays. Tariffs constantly and forever destroy opportunity to you, the consumer. So if you like the idea that American steel companies are void of any competition, not only are they void of competition, they are making record revenue because as the 25% price increase was guaranteed to foreigners, the American steel companies upped their price on you, the consumer. Now, I don't know how many of you could possibly work in American Steel. Maybe I'm wrong and we could pretend everything's great. We could pretend GM is a good car company and they don't suck. We could pretend that it's not a union payoff. It's a union payoff. Very expensive labor at mediocrity production. That's a union. And what a tariff does is protect that union. Trump is protecting a lie of the economy in hopes to see a strong fake facade. It is a facade. It is a Potemkin success. And when you tear apart the actual numbers, there isn't growth. There are bubbles that are created. Protectionist pop. That's what you have. That's why when they talk about the stock market, 50% of you own the stock market. What about the rest that don't? Screw them? That's wrong. That's wrong. It is only through true freedom, true capitalism. That's what builds us. That's what's a strong economy. The fact of the matter is, we're not talking about why it's so detrimental. There is an agreement that happened after World War II called the Bretton Woods Agreement. It is an agreement where we guaranteed the rest of the world we wouldn't implement these policies. That's the agreement. And we made them exchange their currency to the dollar to buy world commodities. And we promised them we wouldn't mindlessly print money. In fact, we were going to attach our money to the gold standard. And we promised them we wouldn't have barriers to prevent growth of their country with our country. In fact, we would embrace the freedom of countries interacting in businesses and capitalists all around the world. And that would spread peace because, by the way, that's the best foreign policy you could ever have. And everyone bought in and they agreed to it. Then in 1971, the original Trump, we call him Richard Nixon. The similarities are frightening, all except for the ugly wife versus pretty wife. But other than that, he's the modern-day Nixon. He took us off the gold standard, and why? So we could mindlessly print and debt. So when I see these children argue with me on Twitter and pretend that national populism was a success, they flex their stupidity, and they reject our own history. But like the Democrats, they must rewrite our history in order to steal the future. That's what a con artist does. So don't confuse bad protectionist policies of Nixon or Hoover and tell me that that's when the world was good, because you're just showing your stupidity. Because these policies take decades to really show ramifications. The ramification of Nixon is the massive inflation that was under the Carter years. He just doubled down on stupid. And it took a free market capitalist like Reagan to set things straight and have the explosion we've enjoyed up until 2008. And you want to talk about the problem with the economy was the infused subsidized housing that Donald J. Trump promoted in 1991 before Congress. And if you think I'm wrong, just look it up. But don't come at me with how protectionism is right and good, and this is anything but a scam. Trumponomics is not capitalism. It is a manipulated Keynesianism. He has more in common with Paul Krugman than Barack Obama does. This is what Krugman sells. National protectionism and Keynesian money pumping into certain sectors of the economy and laws that guarantee absence of competition. Donald Trump should have hired Paul Krugman. They're the same. All right. Now we're going to go to Tom in Deer Park. Tom, thanks for calling the show. I appreciate you holding on.
Hi, Sean. Good morning. Yeah, enjoying your comparisons of socialism and communism to mobsterism. It gave me pause. I don't know how we're going to get out of this, but here's how we possibly got into it. The country founded 240 years ago. At the time, think of how many people were self-employed. Whether you were a merchant or a farmer or a sailor engaged in some sort of commerce, I would put in the 90 to 95 percentile range. People were self-employed or directly in a family business of self-employment. I think that since we've had the technology era and modern commerce, that number has gone, it's inverted, and is probably closer to 4 to 5% self-employed, of which fellows like yourself and I am.
Yeah, it's also called the slow bankruptcy. Yeah, go ahead.
So again, when you think of it from that mentality, the notion of the nanny state, has come in fits and starts, but it's in full blown right now. And I think you combine that with the fact that civics, economics, and critical thinking seem to be lacking in our educational system.
And Tom,
I think we're in this place that both parties are. I don't know any way how we're going to come out of it.
You know what bothers me is that you're never going to come out of it if you have kids, children, young men, and they're arguing misconceptions. So I love when they talk about tariffs and how that used to be. What they leave out, like all good con men, they take a nugget of truth and then they wrap it in lies and deceit, right? Because what they leave out is there was a tariff system from state to state. And the reason there was a tariff system was because there was no income tax. None. It was the only way the government found fair. It was a back-ass version of a consumption tax. It was actually a VAT tax. And we already have that. In modern day, it's called a sales tax. They're screwed up because they don't understand words. And then I have to hear these same idiots misuse globalism when what they're promoting is the true definition of globalism, which was never meant to be an economic word. Globalism is demanding that all countries conform to the same currency. That's what the national protectionist, that's what Trump is. Trump's the globalist. I'm the free marketeer. I want to take advantage of the difference in currency between nations. I want to see the value in it. There's no such thing as a trade deficit. There is only value. And you hear these con men. And here's the other thing, too, that bothers me, Tom. They're smart enough to know what they're doing. It's one thing when I argue with a 20-something-year-old idiot who doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. It's another thing when I hear Steve Mnuchin, when I hear Stephen Moore, who breaks my heart, or when I hear Wilbur Ross, the gangster con man, pretend that there is a deficit when there, in fact, what there is value. I give you this dirty paper with one of my ex-presidents or inventor on it, and you give me a good I want. That's not a deficit. That's me taking advantage of value. By their definition, I have a labor deficit with my landscaper. No, I pay him to do shit I don't want to do. That's the problem. We've lost the fundamentals of and then you misuse these words, and you see these kids like Hare Krishnas just chanting and banging the tambourine when they're arguing against their own future. It's heartbreaking. It's like watching the socialists tell me how good welfare medicine is, Obamacare. It's heartbreaking.
So, Sean, okay, so you've got it. So what's your background that, when did this come to you? At third grade? Or where in your background, in your education, did you get it figured out? And why is it that there's such a swath of the population that either doesn't know or refuses to know?
You want to know what's funny? I watched my grandfather, who I had a lot of respect for. He was the number 2 Delco distributor in Cook County, in Illinois, actually, okay? And I watched his pride in what back then was a very good product, okay? And in 1970, I think it was 6 or 5, the UAW cut a new contract with GM, and my grandfather read the whole fricking thing. Because he was a distributor of Delco products, he got it sent to his store, and we used to sit there, drink coffee. He was a small business guy, one day good, one day bad. But he was a genius. He used to be able to fix cars. It was auto electric service in Melrose Park. Anyway, I watched him read this contract, and he looked at me. I was a little kid, man. I was 10 years old. And he looked at me and he said, "This is it, man. It's now better to be the worker than the owner. And he said at that point, he knew that when you had guaranteed job security and it wasn't attached to the product you produced, that the product would soon suck. But he had this false sense of patriotism. So when the time came when he should have switched over and became a Napa or an O'Reilly and took advantage of the value of trade, he was too patriotic. And he went bankrupt because he had to ask people to pay higher prices for inferior products because they had a GM stamp on it. And it was at that moment I said, "What are you doing, Pa? What are you doing?" And he felt that cost of patriotism, that's what made him wealthy, and he was going to ride that horse till it died. And the reality is that's when you see how patriotism is misused against the true American, because the true American is looking to deliver the best product at the lowest price. That's Americanism. False patriotism, that's what Trump sells. It's not really patriotic. That's why he needs all this bullshit spending. That's why he can never have enough revenue. That's why he's always talking about faking and cooking GDP numbers through spending, government spending, just like Obama did. And I got to hear how these idiots think there's a difference. There's but nuanced difference. He wants a same kind of Obamacare for all the people. Listen to the way when he talks about policies. And this was my argument during the entire process of picking him as the nominee. And now here we are, 2 years later, the country needs one giant frickin' shower. And there isn't a loofah big enough to get us clean. So you're asking, why support Trump? The reality is we're going to servitude, the village of slavery. We're already on our way. It's a one-way street. Now, Trump wants to do it at 30. The Democrats wants to do it at 100. So which way do we get to slavery faster? It's the Democrats. So here I am forced into this despicable, disgusting choice of, do you want to be half stupid or full out retarded? I'll take half stupid, right? It's a sad day. And I argue with myself, Tom. I don't agree with virtually anything. But look at the reality. Step back from a moment. Take your frustration out. Step back. I got President Beto O'Rourke versus one more term of the Amish hip Donald Trump. I got to take Trump, right?
Well, I don't see things in binary terms.
And neither do I, but you got to be real. You got to be real. The reality is we cannot survive a Beto O'Rourke presidency. We can't do it.
Oh, I 100% fully agree with you. There's not a single candidate on the Democrat platform that I could support. If Bill Clinton were running, he couldn't run now. He would be seen as not moderate, but to the right he'd be seen as a person on the right. Balanced budget, for crying out loud. So, yeah, but I don't see it as a binary choice. I like to see somebody primary Trump, and electorally, it is not going to occur.
It'll be a big loser. Yeah. You want to know what
I'm isolated.
You know what the hope is?
Isolated.
You know what the hope is? I'm going to tell you, Tom. There is an avenue here, because here's the thing about Trump: he is pliable. He is pliable, and he does want to succeed. He has the right intention. He's just wrong on the philosophy. So the way to get to him is to go to a guy like Steve Moore. Steve knows this. Steve just sold out. He's a whore. He's never had big money. This is the first time in his life he's in on the scam, right? He knows where all the inside deals are going now. He knows where all the protectionism is going. He's positioning himself. But he fundamentally, in his soul, he knows right from wrong. We need him to go back to who he was when he was writing books about free market. We need to get to Kudlow, right? 8-Ball Kudlow. We need to get to him. And these are the guys. It's within that corrupt, sick structure that our only hope lies. Because it certainly doesn't lie.
Happen,
because here's the thing.
He didn't listen to Mattis. He didn't listen to General Mattis. Mattis went packing, and now he's reverting back to what Mattis was espousing. He didn't listen to Kelly. It's all there. The contemporaneous history on Trump is there.
But here's the thing.
People wish to pay attention to it.
He can lie.
If you're watching Fox and listening to talk, you're done. You don't have a clue. But it's all there, the contemporaneous history. We don't need to wait 8 to 10 years for the books to come out. President of the United States does not listen to he said he'd hire the best people. He hired some excellent people. He doesn't listen to them. Kelly, Mattis.
Yeah.
He's
Well, I don't
arguing
know.
with Bolton right now.
Don't embrace these guys either. These guys are scam artists too. They just want bigger military budget. He gave it to them. They just didn't like the fact he was pulling out. I like what he did when he disagreed with them. We should never be over there. Yemen, for God's sakes. That's an atrocity what's going on. We don't even know what the hell's going on in Syria. We're partnered. They got the CIA partnering up with the Taliban, for God's sakes. So, I mean, I disagreed with those idiots as well. So I don't mind if he doesn't listen to them. My issue is the economy. He cannot deny it soon. The reality versus the propaganda are undeniable in the economy. You and I both know there is a tipping point here. So we're arguing really about who's going to recognize the failure sooner rather than later, and you're already seeing the beginning stages of these speed bumps of propaganda. So I do.
You know who he listens to? It's the circle. It's his base. The Republicans are no different than Democrats.
No, you
they
sell
want
them
their
short.
Free lunch. They want Medicare. They want
Tom.
Medicaid. They just say, "Oh, I'm not a Democrat." They want their free stuff.
Tom, he doesn't have to listen to his base. His base doesn't care. He could sing, "I'm Henry VIII, I am stark naked while juggling," and they'll cheer. They don't care. He doesn't listen to them. They listen to him. Our only hope, really, is that he recognizes if he wears a recession, he's done. Now he'll have nothing. So he may start to slip in free market ideals. Because here's the other thing. I was all worried about China. You know the reality, right? The reality, and I had the kid push it up. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, he's still all tied in with Chinese businesses and trade. He owns half the shipping companies. He owns a piece of the shipping companies. He owns a piece of the phony baloney companies. So ultimately, believe it or not, ironically, the corruption of Wilbur Ross will save our trade war with China. He can't afford it.
Hey, Wilbur Ross. Hey, Sean, my memory's lapsing right now. What company did Mnuchin work for before he started?
Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, yeah. Goldman Sachs.
Thank you. I slipped my mind for some reason.
Yeah.
Go ahead. He's
third generation. And Wilbur Ross he was the kind of like Richard Gere in Pretty Woman, except for the looks and the hookers that had reasonable prices. Wilbur Ross used to pilfer companies that were going bankrupt, then offset the debt with government favoritism and guarantee tariffs against to trade. He made his money primarily in steel, and he did this during the Bush years. Wilbur Ross is a longtime political prostitute. So that whole thing with Wilbur Ross is our only hope. Ironically, the corruption will stop the stupidity of an absolute Hoover policy. But, Tom, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I do appreciate the call, and I'm glad you understand my point. Because without principles, without fundamentals, you're simply arguing which lie, which salesman you like better. And that seems to be the problem. But now, going to, I got to switch topics a little bit because I want to get in, I don't have a lot of time anymore, but I want to get in destination failure, which we call Chicago, Illinois. I think it's crucially important to cover the fact that when you cover these national ideals and these national problems, you focus on where they lead. So when I told you before, it's about getting to the destination of slavery, what can divert us, what can slow us down. And unfortunately, it's the stupidity of Keynesianism sold as Trumponomics. That's our hope nationally. Locally, we're done. You don't have hope. And if you're actually watching the news between Preckwinkle and Lightfoot, you realize we're starting to get used to bad ideas. I hear conservatives go, well, Lori Lightfoot will be good. No, there's no such thing as good. There's just different speeds of bad. Lori Lightfoot isn't going to be good. She'll be better than Preckwinkle because Preckwinkle is a product of the machine, aside from being a walking punchline, Grady. She is a product of the corruption. Now, Lightfoot's kind of in on it, too. She just does it. She's got her toe in it. Whereas Preckwinkle, she's in the shower.
I'm Lori Lightfoot, and I'm running for mayor for our daughter's future and all Chicago's children. That's why nothing will distract me from bringing real change to Chicago by breaking the grip of Ed Burke and the corrupt political machine.
See, that's important. I love that commercial, too. That's where kids dance around. Kids cute as could be. But that's important. She names names, and she identifies and recognizes the corruption. Versus Grady, who embraces it, has profited from it, and pretends it isn't there. Just like I had to pretend she was offended or she was somehow on the side of anti-homosexuals. Here.
Who attacks the sunrise?
Oh, that's the song. I thought that was Preckwinkle guy. No Preckwinkle clip? What happened? You got Preckwinkle down here. All right. Hold on, is this it? No, these are clips of noise. Anyway, Preckwinkle is an absolute death knell, but here's the good news. Preckwinkle recognizes. In fact, there's this big news last night on all the network news in Chicago. They were talking about how she's not going to do TV advertising. 2 weeks before the election, she stops doing TV advertising. And here's the dim-witted reporters with their makeup on and their hair parted to the side, sitting next to the ex-model, and they say, it's an unusual tactic. Oh, is it stupid? You know what's unusual is the fact that any money that's in her coffer, she gets to keep for indefinitely. Indefinitely, she gets to keep it and control it. Of course, she's restricted to just political costs. Yeah, like they're not cooking those books. The reason she stopped advertising is even she knows she's done. She's going to lose. And the reality is she just wants as much money to manipulate and continue to buy political influence in the most corrupt political atmosphere in the country. Chicago, Illinois. I mean, we're in it, and we got to hear every time there's some sort of somebody gets a haircut for cancer, Chicago proud. Chicago proud. Chicago's been a punchline for 60 years. Everyone knows how open and notorious the corruption and the failure and the money laundering scheme is. By the way, Mr. Producer, on my way through all traffic, I keep seeing Walsh. And I remember Walsh Construction. They've got all the road contracts. Walsh Construction. You know, the same construction company that we've had to sue for overbilling for 50 years? And then you look up Walsh Construction and you think it's just Chicago, Illinois? Their scandal goes from Minnesota to New York to New Jersey to all over the country. They got themselves a real money laundering scheme going on. Infrastructure spending, because that's the one thing you can guarantee it's going to happen, whether it's Lightfoot or Preckwinkle. The corruption machine of Madigan and Burke, it's forever. And why? Because we refuse to identify, recognize, and run against it. Ironically, that's what Lori Lightfoot did in her ad. And that's an important part of the ad. The problem is it's distracting because it's such a good ad where everyone's looking at the kid running around. But let us focus on one thing. In this corrupt system, you're at the point of failure where you're picking your least amount of failure. And look at how that expands out to what we talk about when we talk about Trump versus O'Rourke. So, until we get conservatives that have the same shared principles, we're never going to get back to that federalist, anti-federalist argument. But I want you to take pride in the fact this is who we're born of. At a certain point, Venezuela has a civil war. At a certain point, France has a rebuttal. At a certain point, Cook County fights Preckwinkle in a sugar tax. There are breaking points. There is hope. I come on and I've got text messages. What are you saying? There's no hope? Tom asked you how you save it. You're basically saying there's no hope. There's always hope because in us is the seed, is the DNA of liberty. We are born of people who embraced liberty. They were anarchists for the most part. They wanted to put a system of government in that wouldn't reward government tyranny. It would penalize it. It took 240 some years to corrupt it. We can get it back. But we're going to have to get it back from this side of the field. The other side of the field are communists pretending to be socialists who call themselves Democrats. We can get it back from the right side. Now, do I want a third party? I know the libertarians are out there chewing on their steering wheel. Yeah, I do. I think it's important to have a third party. But the system has been so corrupted, so bastardized, that until we can get people that attack the money, the foundation, the foothold in the corruption of politics, we're going to have to work from the Republican side. Sorry, I don't like it any more than you are. You do. I'm going to have to go to these golf outings. You know, it's funny. When I first started doing this, I went to a couple Republican golf outings, and I would see Oberweis handing out the ice cream, and I would see Pat Brady talking about, his kids are in college, like, all this stuff. Like, they're on our team, right? Durkin, his brother's the lobbyist. You're on my team. Just remember, when you see it from your side, look them in the eye and tell them you know what they are. They're a gangster without the courage to go in the alley. And they want to use the power of government to protect their money laundering, their crime family. And don't embrace the idea that the solution is somehow organized crime light in these ghetto casinos just because the Republicans own them. And Gold Rush Gaming in particular owns 50% share, and they pay everybody off. And don't embrace, if we just sell pot, because look at the way in which government sells pot. They can't even deal drugs right. As you look into Colorado, their black market is stronger, making more money than ever. Why? Because they screw up the idea of how to even give the people choice of freedom of how they want to throw their life away. But recognize exactly what we're talking about here. You can't control man through law. You can only enslave him. Our country is found on the absence of law, not more laws to correct bad laws. You want to know the problem with the manufacturing? It's government law that tried to strengthen the corruption of a labor union. That's the problem. You want to bring manufacturing back to America? I'm all for it. Eliminate all of the regulations and rules that make people have to pay people specific amounts, that make them, you can't get contracts unless you have union, unless you're a minority, unless you're a female-oriented. Let's go back to the Reagan years, the real conservative, the only one we've had in modern time, the one who said, now the field is level, go get it. We need more Reagan, we need less Trump.
Our peaceful trading partners are not our enemies. They are our allies. We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world, all while cynically waving the American flag.
He's talking about Trump. Recognize that. Start to think for yourself. Expand upon the basic fundamentals of freedom. Always and forever. It's a plug-in for any problem. Does it control things? As opposed to Donald Trump, who wants to seize Twitter. Do you see what I'm arguing for? I'm arguing for freedom. I want to get back to a time when our political parties were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and you couldn't decide which one you were because you wanted to guarantee the freedom of the man. Not the control of him, not the safety of him, not his health care costs or his free gym memberships. Look at where we've come. It took 240 years to get there, but we can correct it quickly because as bad as we think this is, we still have an opportunity, and the opportunity is always in liberty. My name's Sean Thompson. We're going to be off on Sunday. I'm sorry, but I have to earn a living. I'm going to be off next week during the podcast, but we'll be back the following Sunday. And my guy Macbeth will be rested. He might gain a few pounds. He'll be happy. We'll see you then.